Spread the fire. Welcome back to the Season of Walsh Experience, or SMWX. I'm Season of Walsh, and the week of reckoning is finally here. Lieutenant General Gunther Mkhwanazi will take the stand at the Commission of Inquiry charged with probing his allegations. On the 6th of July this year, he came forth with an absolutely explosive press conference which alleged that there was a criminal syndicate influencing the highest reaches of government, the executive, the criminal justice system, police, judiciary, and prosecutors. It set in train a huge and very explosive set of events, which culminated in President Ramaphosa announcing this urgent commission of inquiry to look into the allegations. Now, the urgent commission has taken more than 2 months to get going, but we're finally here, and now we get to hear Mkhwanazi's side of the story. So in today's episode, I want to equip you with everything you need to know about Mkhwanazi's testimony and ask some of the key questions that we need to get from this commission to add flesh to Mkhwanazi's major allegations, because his press conference lasted for about 35 minutes, and although it cast aspersions and provided evidence for these massive allegations, there are still lots of questions that we need answered from this commission. So before you watch that, and even after you've watched it, you can check whether some of these questions have in fact been answered. Now, I've done some thinking about this commission and indeed Mkhwanazi's allegations, and I would group the allegations into 3 broad categories. So in this video, I'm going to speak about these 3 categories. The first category is what was said about politicians and senior government officials. The second category is what was said about the criminal justice system, including the police, prosecutors, and even the judiciary. And then finally, there's an angle of cartel premiers and celebrities, which also feature in this. So all these 3 are interrelated, but let's focus on those 3 key categories because Mkhwanazi fits into all of them. So let's begin with number 1, which is the heavy political figures. And here, in particular, I'm speaking about people like Senzo Mkhulu. I'm speaking even about people like President Cyril Ramaphosa. I'm speaking about people like Bheki Cele, all of whom have either been at the top of government or at the top of the police in the police ministry. So the first thing, and MPs and parliamentarians, in fact, one of the things that's kind of been missed in all of this analysis, because I went back and watched Mkhwanazi's press conference, is that, let me tell you, this is the first mystery. I want you to take a look at this clip, because he implicates a parliamentarian in the murder of Sindiso Magaka, who was an ANC youth league politician turned local politician in KwaZulu-Natal who was tragically murdered. He says there's an MP who is working with the police who's involved in this murder. Have a look at this, because this is one of the first key questions that Mkhwanazi's testimony will have to uncover.
An additional 35 suspects who are members of the South African Police Service were arrested. The notable one is the one who's now in prison, who's been working with the parliamentarian who was involved in the murder, about the murder of one Sindiso Magaka. We're going to talk about that later.
So first question for me, one of the big questions, who is this parliamentarian who worked with a member of the police who's now been arrested and is in prison in the murder of Sindiso Magaka? There's someone sitting in our parliament who Mkhwanazi alleges is responsible for this, or who played a part in it. Who is this mystery MP? So that's one key question. And the mysteries continue to unfold. I would say probably the biggest, if you could boil down everything that's happened with this Mkhwanazi testimony and some of the key questions that emerge, I would say one key question probably trumps all others. What is Minister on Special Leave Senzo hiding? Because everything flows from that question, if you really think about it. Now, Minister Senzo Mkhulu, who's placed on special leave by Cyril Ramaphosa. Now there's an acting minister / real minister, so there are two ministers at once. One is chilling at home, the other is at work. So we've got two ministers that the taxpayer is paying for. But the real question is, Senzo Mchunu, who was such a key part of President Cyril Ramaphosa's campaign, but a key part of his cabinet as police minister, what is he hiding? Because everything that flows is Mkhwanazi suggesting that there is a conspiracy led by Mkhulu to move senior members of the police, Mkhwanazi, the Provincial Commissioner of KZN, Masemola, who is the Police Commissioner nationally, and Kumalo, who is the head of crime intelligence, to move them aside because Mkhwanazi alleges they were getting closer to figuring out what Senzo Mchunu was hiding. It wasn't just that Mchunu disbanded the political killings task team, which was this task team set up in order to investigate these political killings, which started making or uncovering or unmasking this deeper syndicate. It wasn't just that he disbanded that, because the question is, why did he disband that? Were they probing something that he didn't want them to uncover? Or did he just disband the task team because he had something, he had a bad breakfast that morning? So clearly, if you look at all of this and you boil it down, senior politicians didn't want the political task team to make further discoveries about something. What is that something that is so important that Mkhwanazi threw aside all protocol and addressed the nation directly to make sure that it didn't get lost? So, of course, that's a key question that we need answered in Mkhwanazi's testimony and in Parliament going forward. And all the MPs, all the evidence leaders need to train their attention to what is being hidden here. That creates a deeper question about the president. Now, there's been some serious reporting recently from Jeff Wicks, who I had on this channel, in whose book on Babita Deokaran, government official who was assassinated for uncovering corruption in the Tembisa hospital. In that book, he reveals that a distant relative of President Cyril Ramaphosa, a certain Mr. Morgan Maumela, he alleges is at least linked to corruption in the Tembisa hospital saga. Now, President Ramaphosa has confirmed that this is actually his distant relative. He's related to him through his ex-wife. So I believe he's a nephew of his ex-wife. Now, President Ramaphosa says he doesn't know this person. He knows nothing about him. So, an obvious question is, has he ever met? Are there any pictures that show them together? Is that claim true? Is that denial true? But more deeply in terms of the political question, because Maumela, again, in turn, is linked via Kat Magala to this Mkhwanazi political task team's question. But don't worry about all those details. I'm going to explain them a bit later when I come to the so-called cartelpreneurs, which is a term I'm trying to popularize, because I think tenderpreneur doesn't capture it anymore. So, politically, Senzo Mchunu, the police minister I just spoke about, who may be hiding something according to Mkhwanazi, he is a key ally of President Cyril Ramaphosa in the ANC. He ran Cyril Ramaphosa's campaign in 2017. He was actually the Secretary General candidate for Ramaphosa in that conference. So he ran on the slate, which is basically a grouping which all tried to get office together. So we know that Ramaphosa wanted him to be the CEO of the ANC. And yet, it appears now that he has been involved in, or it is alleged now that he's been involved in this wrongdoing. So what did Ramaphosa know about Senzo Mchunu back then in 2017 when he appointed him to cabinet? But more importantly, when the decision was taken to disband the political killings task team, and that letter was written by Minister Mkhulu, did Ramaphosa know that it was being disbanded? If he knew, then what did he do about it? Did he agree with it or did he disagree? If he didn't know, then why didn't he know? Because he chairs the security cluster. If anyone, he gets intelligence briefings every day, but he doesn't know, then we have a deeper problem that the president is unaware about major security issues. So I would want Mkhwanazi to explain, did Mkhwanazi go to Ramaphosa before he did his press conference and say, Mr. President, there's a crisis here. I've tried all other protocol. Please, can you step in and intervene? And if so, what did Ramaphosa do? So we need evidence leaders, we need parliamentarians to probe how much Ramaphosa knew about this disbandment, how much he knows about the figures who are distantly related to him, who are actually implicated in serious wrongdoing. And there may be allegations at the moment, but the allegations are so serious that they can end a political career, and not just one. So I would say, and then of course you've got Bheki Cele. Bheki Cele has come up in some of the reporting over this, being placed at the homes of some of the key cartel, alleged cartel members. What did he know? Why was he there? Etc. So hopefully Mkhwanazi's testimony can shed light on all of these questions. If not Mkhwanazi's testimony, then the commission itself as it will unfold. I must just take a step back here as I conclude part one, which is about senior politicians. I'm really fascinated by the police commissioner Fani Masemola's testimony, because he's actually the person who runs the police nationally. What does he know? What doesn't he know? What did he try to do? What did Mkhwanazi tell him and when? And did he try to intervene? What was his relationship with Mkhulu? Is he part of the group that is exposing what Mkhulu may be trying to hide? And if so, I think that's going to be maybe even more interesting than Mkhwanazi testimony, because he's right at the top of the police, not just in one province. But okay, cool. I kind of segued there into the police, and as I said, part one was about senior politicians. Part two is about the criminal justice system, which Mkhwanazi placed in question. And he said that it is members of the police, it is members of the judiciary even, members of the National Prosecuting Authority. So I want you to have a look at a clip where Mkhwanazi speaks about the criminal syndicate he believes has been unmasked, and who is being influenced by this syndicate. So take a look at this clip coming up now.
And I can confirm before the South Africans today that the investigation which these members were involved with in Gauteng has unmasked the syndicate. And this syndicate involves, amongst others, politicians who are currently serving in Parliament. The law enforcement officers include the members of the South African Police Service, the Metro Police, and Correctional Services. They include prosecutors in Gauteng province, the judiciary, and all these are controlled by the drug cartel as well as business people in the province of Gauteng. This act, of course, undermines the criminal justice system in this country.
So, I mean, that is probably the absolute high point of this press conference when Mkhwanazi says there is a drug cartel influencing senior politicians in Parliament, which we've discussed. He actually puts it in the plural there, so it may be more than one MP. But then he comes to the criminal justice system, correctional services, prosecutors, he even says the judiciary, and of course the police itself. So this is really the criminal justice system as a whole, and I want to take each part of this as we discuss these allegations around the criminal justice system in turn, and again, pose some questions when we need some detail about this after the press conference. So the first one is the police itself, okay? Now, Mkhwanazi mentions that these dockets that the political Political Killings Task Team, this team that he was building that was uncovering this syndicate by looking at political killings, they had a number of live dockets. Some people had already been arrested, but there were 121 dockets that were still under investigation. 5 of those dockets had instructions to arrest those people. And mysteriously, in March of this year, those dockets were moved after the Political Killings Task Team was in the process of being disbanded, away from Mkhwanazi and back to Gauteng, in particular back to Mkhwanazi alleges Shadrach Sibiya, who at the time is the Deputy Commissioner for Crime Detection in the police. And Mkhwanazi alleges nothing happened to those dockets after they were moved, even though there were these instructions for at least 5 arrests in those 121 dockets. So, of course, a key question then to understand is, what is his understanding of how those dockets were moved? Who told him to move him? And why does he believe those dockets were moved? There was actually an interesting gap. So he was informed that they'd been moved in January, but they were ultimately moved in March. We actually know now that they've been given back to Mkhwanazi. That was the whole furore that happened a few weeks ago, last week, where they were moved back. The minister and the president seemed to suggest that they had a problem with them being given back to Mkhwanazi, but eventually they were given back. Mkhwanazi also said something very, very controversial, where he said there was a meeting between him and Sibiya where Minister Nkulu tried to reconcile the two, and he basically said he wouldn't reconcile with criminals, which appears, if you interpret it, to suggest that he is accusing Sibiya of being a criminal, which is a major accusation. Now, meanwhile, Sibiya was told to stay at home by the National Commissioner, Masemola, and he has now been suspended officially. So we need to understand this relationship and the role that just Sibiya is playing, and of course then Sibiya needs to give his side of the story at the commission as well, because he comes through as a key figure within the police. Now, it appears, if you take a look at what Mkhwanazi has alleged, that you've got Sibiya on the one hand, and people who are linked or close to him. As far as I can make out, his testimony isn't fully clear on a certain General Feroz Khan, but Mkhwanazi says he got some messages which had leaked information, and this person said you'll be briefed by Khan later. So I'm not sure if that means that Khan is on the Sibiya side of things, or that he knew about the leaks, or that he was just going to brief Mkhwanazi later. But Mkhwanazi also mentions a certain General Khan within the police and Sibiya. So those are 2 figures about whom we need more detail. What does Mkhwanazi think Khan knew? Why was he going to brief him about this leaked information? And of course, Sibiya. So there's like one orbit or sphere or grouping in the police who seem to be trying to protect the minister, according to Mkhwanazi. This, and whether Khan is or is not part of that is still needs to be clarified by his testimony. Then there's another grouping, I would say, of 3 people. Mkhwanazi, as I said, Masemola, who's the commissioner himself, and then the head of crime intelligence. Crime intelligence is where you try to actually figure out and bust cases by figuring out what's going on before they happen. Crucial to law enforcement. The head of crime intelligence is a Mr. Kumalo. Now, interestingly, just before Mkhwanazi's press conference, Kumalo was arrested and brought before court in a case, I think, involving fraud. So what Mkhwanazi is alleging is that, and there were talks that both Mkhwanazi, the rumors that both Mkhwanazi and Masemola were going to be arrested themselves. So what Mkhwanazi seems to be saying is that there was an attempt by sections of the police and senior politicians to silence this Mkhwanazi grouping in the police that was uncovering the syndicate by arresting them and effectively moving them away from influence in the police. So it was first going to be Kumalo, then they were going to target Mkhwanazi and or Masemola, and effectively get them out of the police through suspension or through these cases that were going to be brought against them. So Mkhwanazi issued a preemptive strike in some ways to prevent this plan from unfolding. So we need to know, again, what does Mkhwanazi understand are the motives behind this? But did he have information he would be arrested? Did he have information that Masemola would be arrested? And what is the nature of Khumalo's case? Because it seems to me that when he says the judiciary and prosecutors are involved, he seems to think that this case is a sham and that cases brought against people within the police are actually part of this overall syndicate's plan to sideline Mkhwanazi, Masemola, and Khumalo. But let's talk about some of the other allegations, because these were left quite vague, actually, when you go back and listen to them. He says that, and again, he's unmasked a syndicate. He explains what happened, but then he just says that it's influencing prosecutors. So that's more than one prosecutor. So who are these prosecutors, and what evidence does he have that prosecutors are involved? He says correctional services, so this is basically prisons and officials within prisons. Who's involved? What evidence does he have there? And then he says the judiciary. And this is, again, I mean, it's a press conference of spectacular claims, but the judiciary, that's huge. And notice he doesn't say the magistracy. So he's not just talking about magistrates, but he could be talking about judges, because the judiciary normally relates to judges rather than just magistrates. Magistrates are in lower courts, whereas judges tend to deal with higher importance matters in the High Court, appeal courts, even the Constitutional Court. So what does he mean by this affects even the judiciary? Does he mean just magistrates, and he was using that term as a catch-all, or does he have evidence that judges are involved? And if judges, which judges and how high? So that is a fundamentally important clarification that we need from Mkhwanazi. If he's able to provide substantial evidence of judges being involved and influenced by this criminal syndicate, it's going to be a lot. But if he isn't able to provide substantial evidence for that, then that was a very reckless statement made. So we'll have to see. I'm fascinated to see what he says about the judiciary, because he does mention the judiciary as being influenced. Okay, or members of the judiciary, not the whole judiciary, but he says members of the judiciary. Right, so let's get to the third part, which is what I'm calling alleged cartelpreneurs and celebrities, because interestingly, not only did Mkhwanazi implicate senior politicians, but he suggests that there's this kind of underworld involving people who get government tenders and celebrities. And there's this tangled web of influence, and that group also influences politicians. So there's basically this cartel, the syndicate, which works in nightlife, works in entertainment, but also works to influence politicians to make sure that they get tenders, etc. So the first question here in this grouping in part 3 is, what is the nature of the syndicate that Mkhwanazi says has been unmasked? He just says we unmasked the syndicate. Now he mentions some names that could be part of the syndicate. He mentions the name of Vusumuzi Kat Matlala, who was actually arrested by the Political Killings Task Team. Is he actually saying that Matlala is indeed part of the syndicate, and what evidence does he have for that? As I mentioned earlier, in terms of Cyril Ramaphosa, his distant nephew, Morgan Maumela, is Mkhwanazi alleging that he is part of the syndicate or not? If not, who are the members of the syndicate? There's a certain Mr. Brown Muhodzi, who seems to have been an intermediary. He wasn't working for Senzo Mkhunu officially, but Mkhwanazi describes him as an associate who would put pressure on different members of the police who had access to all this leaked information. Nkulu said he didn't know him. Kwanazi says there's telephonic evidence that he did know him and he denied knowing him in Parliament. Nkulu walked that back in a statement and said he's a comrade, but he doesn't know him very well. Is Brown Mahotsi part of the syndicate? So what we need out of this is detail on what the nature of the syndicate is and who is running the syndicate. What are the drug links? What, if any, are the international links? What are the political links? And who exactly are they influencing? And what is the evidence to suggest? Because remember, it's a spectacular claim, so it requires spectacular evidence. What is the true evidence to suggest that there really is this syndicate in the shadows that's affecting everything from tenders to police to judiciary to the criminal justice system, and who are the members of the syndicate? Now, Kwanazi says that when they arrested Kat Matlala on an attempted murder charge, what eventually happened was that Matlala's phone records were made available, and this is where they began to discover a lot of this stuff. So again, that's something that needs to be inquired into. What came out of those records, and what did Kwanazi discover that made him link Matlala to Senzo Mkhulu? Katiso Molefe is another name that comes up, and he was the person who was arrested when Ken Kunene was found in his house. How is he linked to all of this? There are these firearms which seem to be linked to this syndicate because they have been traced to multiple different crimes, including the murder of DJ Somebody. So what is the nature of these firearms? Who owns them? Do they belong to the syndicate? What does the ballistic evidence that the political killings task team uncovered tell us about the syndicate? Kwanazi mentions that there were high-profile artists in the plural. Now, we know that DJ Somebody is a high-profile artist who was killed by these firearms that the police allege trace back to similar crimes and similar figures. Are there other artists in Gauteng who were killed? If so, who are they? Or was it just one artist? So again, that's a question that I would have for Kwanazi. So, as you can see, and to try and sum it all up, I would say that there are three main categories that we need to be looking at in terms of getting answers and more detail and clarity from Kwanazi's allegations. First, the senior politicians, senior ANC politicians at the highest levels of government. Who are the MPs involved? What did the president know? What was Senzo Mkhulu trying to hide? Are there any former ministers who are who need to answer questions based on public reporting? And are those allegations about them true or not? Secondly, the criminal justice system. What is the evidence to suggest that members of the criminal justice system have been influenced by this cartel, or at least that the cartel has attempted to influence them? Police, judiciary, correctional services, prosecutors, and who are they? And then finally, who are the masterminds? Who are the alleged cartelpreneurs? And how do celebrities feature and artists feature in this underworld? And if we are able to get answers to all of those things, I can assure you that South African politics will never be the same. The Ramaphosa presidency may not survive. Minister Senzo Mkhulu's political career hangs in the balance. The ANC's electoral fortunes could be absolutely decimated, and South Africa could be in a place where we would have to reckon with one of the most ghastly, terrifying, and disappointing chapters in our history, where the institutions that were supposed to protect us ended up being the institutions that were used against us. But all this remains to be tested and remains to be seen. And what's going to be so fascinating about this is that Kwanazi is both going to be given a platform to explain so much of what the public is desperate to know, but he will also be subject to further scrutiny, and we'll be able to see if some of his allegations stand up to that scrutiny. This channel has been keeping you up to date on the explosive Mkhwanazi allegations ever since the 6th of July, and I assure you this week I've got you covered. We're going to be watching very closely. We're going to be speaking to analysts. We're going to be speaking to decision makers. I'm going to be doing my own analysis. So this is the place to be this week. If you're ever in doubt or you hear the word Mkhwanazi and you want to figure out what's going on, check back to the channel. I've made a series of analysis videos, so if you're just new to this, go back to the channel, search through, you'll see there are a host of different videos which analyze this Mkhwanazi situation and what it means. Make your way through that archive. Stay tuned on SMWX. Subscribe, help us reach
Just come and manifest yourself today, Father. Lord, come and take your rightful place in our hearts today as we surrender. Upon the throne, in majesty and splendor, surrounded by an endless throne, that all of heaven is holy, holy, Come on, family, we just lift him up. There's only one to be praised. There is only one who sings. There is only one with praise. There is only one worthy of. Oh, we sing hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Let's sing this place. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.